So, our speaker today is Tim Northrup, VP Chief Insurance Operations Officer here at Adventist Risk Management. Welcome, Tim.
It's a pleasure to join you.
It is very clear that this topic is of great interest and concern to everyone. So, I'm going to turn this over to you and let's get started.
Excellent. As Dave mentioned, today we're going to talk about cyber risk. And today, the presentation, we're going to address it from a little bit different angle on some of the exposures and challenges that you as an organization will face, and hopefully we'll provide you some great solutions on how to talk and how to get through those. We're going to talk about exposures and how to identify some of those and some of the tools that we will provide for you. We're going to talk about the stakeholders, the people who have the decision-making power when it comes to cyber risk in your organization. We're going to talk to you about tools on how you can assess the risk. And then most importantly, we're going to provide you prevention strategies. We want to quickly define some terms that we'll be using through the presentation, so I'll just read these. Cyber, meaning computer network, or virtual reality, used in the formation of compound words: cyber talk, cyberspace. Data breach. A data breach is the intentional or unintentional release of secure information to the untrusted environment. Denial of service. A type of attack on network that is designed to hamper or harm the network by flooding it with useless traffic. Virus. A segment of self-replicating code planted illegally in a computer program, often to damage or shut down the system or network. So with those terms defined, we may use them throughout the presentation, but we thought those were important ones that we all kind of have an understanding of what they mean. So it seems like every day we hear about these type of cyber attacks, and I want to talk about two that have happened recently. I'm sure all of you heard in December the Target store and how they got hacked. And it appears at the best case scenario at this point is about 40 million people's records got compromised. Now, Target's a large store, and that may be in their realm not a lot of people, but that's a lot of records. The other one that recently came up to my attention was the University of Maryland, which is just down the street from us here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And they had about 309 records of personal information hacked into. And we're going to talk about those. They had social security names breached, dates of birth breached, and people's names and addresses breached in that one. And while the one at Target got a lot more news because it was so much larger, the reality is the one at Target was just, and I say that loosely, just people's credit card numbers and the security codes for those credit card numbers. So that was rather easily fixed from the standpoint of the credit card company could turn off your credit card and reissue it. But the University of Maryland, 309,000 records, was kind of the holy trinity of records being hacked into, being people's names, dates of births, and social security numbers. With that information, you're able to take over somebody's identity and cause a lot more damage. These are both large organizations. While they're a lot larger probably than most church organizations, think about it from the perspective of they probably have a lot more resources put in the area of cybersecurity and the prevention of that happening. So when we talk about it within our organizations, what are the resources that we put into this? And what is our exposure? What data is at stake? I often hear when I talk to religious organizations and churches and conferences is, what's my exposure? I don't have any exposure. Well, I'm an employee. I believe that Adventist Risk Management probably has my driver's license on record. I drive on their behalf. They have my birth date. They have my social security number. They may have financial account numbers when they direct deposit your check into your bank account. Credit card numbers. The church does online giving. Yes, most of you probably use eadventist.net, but I do know there are some local churches who accept credit card numbers directly from their parishioners and record those. I do believe also there's some schools that still do tuition through credit cards. So just because you use eadventist.net and you're not aware of that your conference may not be recording credit numbers, your schools or churches may be using that information and have it on record. And then as an employer, you may have personal health information. Adventist Risk Management, manages the healthcare plan for the North American Division, and I knew we pass information back and forth with many of you via email that may have private information on your on your employees. Financial information we talked about a little bit, and then proprietary information and business secrets. While it may not be directly thought of in the Adventist church, there are some things that we do that we may not want out used without our permission. So as we go through the presentation, think about these things and how they might be applicable to your organization.
You know, Tim, I used to work at a conference before I joined Adventist Risk Management. And at the conference where I worked, it was a smaller conference, and a lot of the IT support, especially when it came to the network and servers, was really not handled by us there at the conference level. It was handled at the union. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to this idea of whose risk is that if it's really being handled at the union level? Is that no longer the conference's issue, or is that still our issue? Where do you draw the line there?
It's a great question. And it can be hard to define, but the reality is you need to go through the exercises we're going to talk about to determine where the exposure lies and what exposure is there for your organization. Well, yes, the data may be stored at the server at the union office. Are you aware of what security they have in place? Are you aware that they may have insurance or not have insurance? What if the data is hacked through one of your computers and gets into the union server and affects another conference's information? Is that conference going to want to hold your conference accountable, or are they going to hold the union accountable? So these conversations are good to have well in advance of any data breach. And when you have the conversations with the union, with the other conferences that store their data there, I think you'll arrive at solutions that are amicable to all parties there. We often just think of computers in our office or the servers being the area that are most attacked. But the reality is there's regular email that oftentimes gets hacked into. We had a client 4 or 5 months ago that one of my colleagues got an email from this individual. It was their signature and it was everything. But they were asking a question for ARM to deposit money into a bank account. An ARM never had deposited money into a bank account like this before. So my colleague reached out to this person and said, "Hey, I got this email from you and just want to make sure it's legit." Got an email back, "Yes, it is." But it still seemed a little sketchy. So my colleague called this person on the phone, and the person said, "No, I didn't send any of those emails. I'm not aware of any of this." The reality is her email had been hacked into. Someone was using her email address, sending emails on her behalf, and intercepting the responses before she even knew they came through. So emails are susceptible to hacking. Accidental emails, improper disposal. When your IT team gets rid of old data and the backups, are they shredding them, or are they just throwing them in the regular trash? And when they do, who might pick up that data or pick up those tapes or those cartridges and have access to things? Of course, there are laptops. A lot of us travel. We bring our laptops with us. Are your laptops encrypted? Do they have security? And then another area that's not new, but our mobile devices. Think about how many of your employees you've supplied a company telephone for that is connected to your system. But they also may be connecting to your system via an iPad or some other device. And do you have a policy in place to work with those? Where are the dangers? This slide shows kind of the statistics on where things come from. I'd point out that outsource or electronic backup is a big one. Lost laptops are a big one. And malicious insiders. And we'll talk a little bit more about employee training and preventing inside theft as well.
Tim, I can't help but notice that on the pie chart there is also paper records. I thought we were talking about cybersecurity here. Why are paper records considered part of this pie chart?
Yep. The reality is we call this cyber liability, but it really provides coverage for the theft of identity type information. And an example of this is a couple of years ago when the hospital in Joplin, Missouri got hit by the tornado. Thousands of hospital records, paper records, were taken out by the tornado and strewn all over the country. Their cyber liability policy covered those records because it was a theft of identity, or it was a loss of identity potentially. So as we work through this with your organizations, if you still have a lot of paper records with people's personal information, we'll do our best to make sure your cyber liability policy covers the theft of paper or the loss of paper records as well. Are the risks real? You bet they are. And you see this on the news all the time. You can see the large number of the thefts or the data breaches that happened between January 10 of 2005 and October of 2012. And think about that. That doesn't even include the Target loss, which is an additional 40 million in one loss. So it's only getting worse. And I think a lot of times we sit back and say, this only happens to large organizations. We hear of Target, we hear the University of Maryland, DSW Shoe Warehouse, or some of the large organizations, but 50% of the organizations have 1,000 or less employees. And then 26% were on companies with 11 to 100 employees. That's a pretty good cross-section of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and our employer groups. And I think a lot of that leads to, you're a small organization, you may not have the financial resources, or you may not think you have the financial resources, you may not have a dedicated IT team, but all of these things lead to you being a very susceptible organization to theft of servers and things like that. Another big issue with cyber liability is, yes, you'll have the theft of the information and the data may be stolen. And the reality is that data may never be used in a harmful way. It might have been just somebody having fun trying to prove something. But the reality is most states now require you to identify or to notify every person whose identity or personal information has been compromised. And that could be quite costly. And then also every state or most states will have fines and penalties for not meeting the minimum requirements of security on your network. And I point that out because the notification and those types of things and the credit monitoring are covered under the insurance policy, but fines and penalties are not insurable under insurance policy. So you can have a loss and never really recognize a loss, meaning that someone's credit card was used illegally or someone started an identity theft. You still have to do the notification to the thousands of employees or information or people who were compromised. And that can be a very lengthy and expensive process. How much does a data breach cost? In 2012, it was about $194 per lost customer record or per lost employee record, whatever that might be. And you can see that $80 makes up the notification side and $114 in lost business. So, like I said, almost every state requires you to go through the notification process. Without the insurance policy, you'd be looking at a minimum or on average $80. But there are additional costs. There's public relations. There's your good standing in the community. Target probably had a much larger financial impact on their bottom line if people didn't want to go back to Target and shop there because they did not trust that Target was protecting their personal information. I think as a church, that's very important. Technology changes and staff retaining, reward for expenses, extortion demands. This is kind of the new thing of people will hack into your servers and they will hold the data and extort you. They will demand payment to return it. And the reality is it was compromised. You have to do the notifications, you have to do those things, and then you may have to pay to get it back or whatever it is, but the insurance company will work with you that. Replacing stolen funds or securities. You know, if your bank or if your systems get hacked and money gets stolen, that's above and beyond the people's lost records. And then we mentioned compliance fines and fees. Those are things that are quite costly to organizations. Stakeholders. We want to spend some time on this. And as Adventist Risk Management has worked with the church on trying to sell and work with identifying the exposure when it comes to cyber liability, we've identified that the stakeholders at each organization obviously bring a very important role to that. And we want to talk about administration stakeholders and IT stakeholders. From an administration side, if you're in an administrative position, president, treasurer, secretary, IT manager, whatever that might be, this needs to be important to you. You've heard Adventist Risk Management for years say, safety starts at the top. The culture of your organization starts with the top managers in the organization. So you need to communicate with your staff that cybersecurity is a priority in your organization. Communication is highly important. I worked in an organization and they implemented a new policy that cell phones were going to lock after if they weren't used for less than a minute or for more than a minute. There was an amazing amount of pushback from us, the employees, of, oh, that's a waste of my time. It's going to cause problems. I'm not going to want to enter my security code. But the reality is, when it was explained and we all better understood the liability that having an unlocked cell phone out in society, if I lost it, caused the organization, the communication by the IT administration and by the administration of the organization, while we still may have not liked it, we understood better why the organization was implementing these new rules and regulations. And nowadays, hey, we all do cell phone passcodes and things like that, and it becomes second nature. But without a lack of communication and buy-in from your overall organization, they're not going to understand that. You need to empower your IT department to find and implement solutions organization-wide. IT oftentimes is something that is not understood by many people in the organization. It's like, oh, it's computers. I don't know. I don't understand them. I got an IT department. They take care of them. My experience is the IT department sitting down there saying they don't understand us. They don't know what we need. They don't understand the liabilities we have. They don't understand the security holes we have. If only they would support us more. So administration needs to decide this is important. We're going to reach out to our IT department and we're going to work with them. Support them financially. I can promise you, you've worked in it. You know that solutions in the IT arena are not inexpensive. But without them, the impact on your organization will be much larger than that. So you need to sit down and work with them and support them financially. Listen to IT's concerns and recommendations. These professionals are working on your network. They're involved in classes. They understand the bigger picture. And if they come to you with concerns and recommendations and you just say, oh, I don't understand it. I don't need to understand it. It's not important. They'll soon stop coming to you. So you need to listen and understand what they're telling you. You can verify it, but work with them. And then facilitate business process changes. I can promise you IT is going to need to implement changes in security, changes in the way you access the network, changes in how mobile devices connect or don't connect or whatever it might be that the people on the business side of your organization are going to have a problem with. But you've got to say, no, as an organization, this is important to us and we support the process changes in it. And then most importantly, demand accountability. You've set up the guidelines, set up a timeline. You want to know where you're at in your IT needs are, where you want to get to, and what it's going to take to get there. Think of those three things of where are we at as an organization when it comes to cybersecurity, where do we want to be, and what's it going to take to get there. And keep those in mind as you set up timelines and implementation schedules. We'll go over to the IT side. Excuse me. IT oftentimes, like I said, they recognize that cybersecurity is important, but they felt like they've been ignored for a lot of years or a lot of time. It's important that you sit down and let them know it's a priority. Talk with them, meet with them. I used the example this morning when I was talking to a colleague of how often do you as the president of your organization sit down with your treasurer and talk about budget and the financial standing of your organization? Do you do it once a week? Do you do it once every other week? When was the last time you sat down with your information technology manager and said, how's that working? The reality is information technology is the backbone of every organization right now. You all know when it's not working, the whole office is in an uproar. This person can't get into their email. This person can't do that. But yet when those things happen, we're all concerned. IT fixes it and then we move on. But did you take the time to sit down with your IT person and say, why did that happen? What can we do to make our network more stable? What can we do to make it more secure? So start thinking of your IT as every bit as important as every other business function in it. You need to create an atmosphere where your IT people understand their own abilities and limitations. You may be from a very large organization. You have a staff of 5 IT people. There, you have the person who's your help desk person. You have the person who's in charge of security, and they're all finely tuned professionals in those areas. You may be from a small academy where the treasurer or the secretary of the academy is also your quote unquote IT person. That's not wrong, but those people probably recognize their limitations and their own abilities, but they're probably uncomfortable sharing with those with you as an administrator because they fear job security. They fear you may not be happy with the job they're performing. But if you have a conversation and say, no, this is important to our organization, we understand your limitations and we will find ways to support those. You need to be open to and value external audits. Once again, I kind of come back to the financial world. For years, the financial world gets audited every year by an outside auditor. It's an okay thing. It happens in life. I think that most people that work in the financial and accounting realm realize that's a tool. It helps them find the weaknesses in the process and find ways to better do those. The same value can be added to bringing in an outside company to do an audit of your IT systems. I'll share a quick story of kind of the experience we had here at Adventist Risk Management. We recognized about a year and a half ago that cybersecurity was important to us as an organization. And one of the best things we did was go out and hire a company to come in and test our network, test our security. They tried to access things remotely. They physically brought people into our building and sat down at some of our desks without us knowing to see if they could access things on our computers. Yeah, the results were very, very valuable for us. It gave us a direction. It helped us identify the weaknesses in our system and helped us to move forward on those things. We're going to talk about the assessment process. There are a lot of different tools you can use to assess where you're at. The cyber liability application, while oftentimes is viewed as an application for insurance, as you'll see in a few minutes, actually is a great assessment tool. It will help you identify weaknesses and strengths within your current system. We can also provide you an information security self-assessment as well. It's an 11 or 12-page document that will help your IT people do a self-assessment. It will guide them to the places in a normal system that you need to address. And then we already talked about an information technology audit by a third party. It might cost a few dollars, but I think it's a very great investment in understanding where your systems are at. We want to talk a little bit about the application. And one of the areas in the insurance world is you read a lot of articles and you get a lot of feedback from clients that the application is daunting. I don't know where to start with it. I'm the treasurer. I'm the secretary of the conference. I'm the business manager, and I also am the IT person. I don't know where to start on these things. Start on it. Work through it. Adventist Risk Management, your account executive will help you through it. And then, like I said, if you bring in a third party to do the audit, they can also help you answer a lot of these things. But we wanted to go through a few of the questions to kind of show you how this will help you and what the information is that we're looking for. Revenue to your organization is part of the underwriting criteria. So they will ask you for what the revenue is. They will ask you for a copy of your most recent financial statements. That's an important part of the insurance rating process. That's relatively easy for all of us. We'll get to number one here. Has the applicant designated chief privacy officer? So this instantly tells you that, quote unquote, the insurance or the information technology world usually has a privacy officer. Does your organization have one? Do you even know what that means? If not, we can work with you and get you some job descriptions and some job functions of what that means. But ultimately, as you work through this application, it's going to lead you to maybe some weaknesses in your organization in the area of technology. So you might want to start with appointing a privacy officer and what that means. Does the applicant have a written corporate-wide privacy policy? I guess as a lot of our organizations, we've not addressed that. But if you haven't, we can work with you and we can help you share some of the finer points. But what are your employees' share with privacy? We all have passwords to our computer. A couple of years ago, I worked for an organization and everybody shared passwords among everybody. That's an issue when it comes to a privacy policy normally. Because what if I share my password with a colleague and they inadvertently even do something malicious in the system? It's going to come back and look like Tim Northrup did that. But these are the very simple things that are addressed in a privacy policy and can go much deeper than that. These things that sound like very common sense type solutions often are not implemented in organizations and lead to great exposure for cyber liability risk. We talked about earlier, When you get rid of data that's been backed up, do you just throw the cartridge in the trash can, or do you shred it and take care of it in a pertinent way? Those little things can change the outcome for your organization. The next question, is the applicant even compliant with its privacy policy? A lot of organizations have a privacy policy from 1985. It's been sitting there. The dust has been collecting on it. But it's something to start with. Are you even compliant with the one you have in place? So it's one thing to make a policy. It's one thing to have a policy. But from an insurance side, from a risk management side, are you following your own standards? Number 5, does the applicant restrict employee access to personally identifiable on a business need-to-know basis? Do you have firewalls? Do you have security in place that doesn't allow every employee to see an HR file for everybody else? Do you know that people can't get in, the people who receive the healthcare information from ARM, do you know that their email is encrypted so that someone else can't see those things? Do you have in place that when someone's not at their desk for a few minutes, their computer locks down and doesn't allow someone else to log in and see the information they're working from? These very simple things often aren't done in a lot of organizations. So it's important that we review them and make sure they're there. Computer system controls. Does the applicant publish and distribute written computer and information system policies and procedures to its employees? When you hire a new employee, do you let them know what the protocol is in your organization? Do they understand what the privacy is? Do they understand what their passwords need to be? Do they understand those things? Do they know that they can't put a thumb drive into their computer and take a bunch of information home and work on it from their home computer? Because that information is no longer in your secure environment. So have you made them aware of those things? This to me is a very important one, number 4 down here. Does the applicant have a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, an incident response plan for network intrusions and virus incidents? We'll talk with A and B as a disaster recovery and a business continuity plan. If you have all of your servers in the union office or in your conference office, and that union office or your conference office has a fire, do you have a way to get your systems back up and running so that your organization can continue its business and its mission? I think it's very important nowadays that you work with and get a co-location set up, or at minimum, a very strong off-site backup system. But a lot of people, a lot of organizations at the administration level think these things are going on, but they don't verify and check. An organization we recently worked with, the IT department was 100% positive all of their information was being backed up. They had a backup plan written. They showed it to their administration. It was all there. When it really came down to the investigation, no one was actually doing the backup and hadn't done it for quite some time. So while all the pieces were in place, no one had checked to make sure it was being done. And you look back and you kind of shiver and say, boy, if that organization, something had gone wrong and their servers had been corrupted or burned in a fire or whatever it is, and everybody thought there was a backup of all their financial data and all their accounting data and all their HR stuff, and it hadn't been done, it puts your organization in a very hard place to continue to operate. Those are kind of the things we wanted to cover on the application. I would say from an application standpoint, don't be intimidated by it. It's a step-by-step process. You've got to start with it. You've got to work through it. If you need additional support, Adventist Risk Management will do its best to provide it. And or you may need to bring in a professional from the outside that can assist you on it. And the reality is yeah, it's a little money involved, but when you really stop and think about the financial impact to your organization, if you don't, it becomes kind of an easy decision. We want to talk about prevention strategies. So we've gone through the assessment, you've identified all the weaknesses and the strengths in your organization, and now you've come up with ideas on how to fix them. It's time to implement policies. Implement your safety policy, implement your security policy. That's a prevention strategy. Train your employees. A lot of things we assume is that an employee knows this or an employee knows that, but train them, help them understand why the policy is there, what the benefit is to them, what the benefit is to the organization, what the risk is if we don't all follow the rules and the policies. Implement encryption. This is a big one, and I think it takes a lot of review by a professional in the IT industry. But if you really have a lot of sensitive information and you have a server that has employee social security numbers, dates of birth, and names on one location, it really might be worth the investment of encrypting that server. And those are things you got to look up. We talked about backup. Do you have a backup place? Do you have a co-location place in place? Updates and patches. Those of you who have laptops and computers, Windows, they send out updates, they send out things all the time. And when you're shutting your computer down or you turn it back on, it says, updating 1 of 14 or whatever it is. Well, the same things happen on servers. But if you don't have an IT person who's focused and part of this, your organization may be years behind on updates and patches. They don't put those updates and patches out just to waste your time. The reality is they have found a hole in their system and they're sending you something to correct that. So those simple little things you need to make sure are being done for your organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about content controls.
Content controls, let me speak to that one just briefly. It gets into things like if you have a website or if you're running a social media campaign, you're using Twitter and Facebook. Content controls have to do with, are you verifying that what you are putting up on your website and those people who have access to your website are putting up correct information or information that represents your organization best? Is there some legal review or at least a second set of eyes making sure that what goes up there doesn't compromise your organization's image?
It's a good point. I think a lot of times we overlook the speed in which things are posted to our internet or our social media things. As Dave said, it's important to have a process in place that makes sure those things aren't jeopardizing your organization. Solutions. We've kind of talked about some of the holes, some of the areas. We want to talk about solutions. And a lot of times organizations and as people, we look as an insurance policy as the solution. The reality is the time that an insurance policy responds, the horse has already left the barn, as it were. The accident's already occurred. And yes, an insurance policy can greatly benefit your organization, and it can do a lot of things to make it easier for you. But as we talked about, an insurance policy is not going to bring back your loss of reputation in the community. That is what it is, and if you've not addressed it, it will still be there. It's not going to cover fines and penalties. So an insurance policy brings a lot of things, but it takes assessing the risk and figuring out what it is, and most important, prevention policies and plans. And then thirdly, or lastly, really, if something really does go wrong and there's a true accident, that's where cyber liability policy comes into play. I look at insurance as for an organization as the suite of things that are covering your organization, your appetite for risk. And this quickly shows on the far left some of the first party things, physical damage to data, virus hacking, denial of service, and then what we call third party. These are damages that are caused to something or somebody besides your organization. Theft and disclosure of data. Did somebody hack into your servers, use your servers and your internet to hack into somebody else's organization? The reality is when you look back at the Target loss, they were one of their vendors, one of their service vendors was actually where the hack occurred. It was the people who serviced their refrigerators and freezers in the stores. They hacked into those people's computer, which had a connection to Target and allowed Target to be breached. So that was actually damage to a third party from that service vendor. So when you look at your suite of coverages, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with property insurance, general liability insurance, executive risk, and those things. But you'll see on the far right, without a cyber insurance policy, your organization may be left with no coverage under those other policies for the things there. So that's kind of the sales point for cyber liability insurance is it becomes a cohesive unit to the other big policies you have and will help protect you in those areas. We want to give a quick overview of what we talked about today. We talked about the exposures. You have data that's stored. You run an HR department, so you have people's social security numbers. You may have local churches collecting credit cards. Your local churches will have websites or Facebook pages, so you want to make sure that those things are covered. We talked about the stakeholders. I'll dwell with the decision makers. It's important that this is important to you. It's important that you communicate to your employees and your churches that the prevention of cyber liability issues is important to you, and that you listen and work closely with your IT department to solve the problems that may arise. You'll use an assessment tool, whether that's an application or bringing in a third party to help you assess those things. Well, that will further your ability to identify things. And then you'll implement prevention strategies. So as you go through this process, it will be a never-ending process. I can assure you, hackers are very creative people. They will find new ways to challenge you. But this now becomes an important element as an administrator in an organization. You worry about the finances, you worry about the mission of your church, but you also need to worry about the technology side of your organization as well. We hope that this has been of value to you. Please contact your account executive if you'd like to pursue cyber liability insurance and some of the prevention strategies we've talked about here. Contact them. We'll work with you closely, but we want to make sure this is an important part of the success of your organization.
Well, thank you very much, Tim.